It's going to take you at least twice as long as you think. It will probably be 3 times more frustrating and challenging than you could imagine. And it's 1,000,000 times more rewarding if you stay the course, ask for help, and don't give up. Just keep going. I was listening to a friend of mine who's a keynote speaker yesterday, and she said she's a fighter pilot, one of very few fighter pilots in all of the military. She's in the Air Force, and she said that she went in saying, "I will fail out before I walk out. I'm capable. I'm going to do this." Obviously, asking for help and getting all the training, but they will have to fail me because I'm not quitting. And that's my advice, to recognize this is going to be a whole lot harder than you imagine. And there's no way for us that have gone through it to really tell you. You have to go through it, but don't give up.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. We're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Paul Daniels. And Paul, in his own words, high school and college was difficult for him, had dyslexia that wasn't diagnosed until he was 40, but had that earlier on without realizing it, but also worked his way through school and graduated and worked for a business out in Arizona, then started his own sportswear company. Started small. I think bought hot dogs for food and lived in his car, which sounds like a great thing. And then sold that business, worked for another business, and then moved around to a couple of different small businesses, and then started a side hustle as a consultant alongside the full-time job, which is what he's doing now. So with that much as introduction, welcome on the podcast, Paul.
Thanks, Devin. Glad to be here. Long-time listener, first-time guest.
There you go. Good. Excited to have you here. So,
thanks.
Well, with that, I took a much longer journey and packed it into the 30-second version. So why don't we unpack that a bit and tell us how your journey got started in high school and college?
Yeah. So, like most entrepreneurs, I started cutting lawns for when I was young, and got other kids in the neighborhood to cut the lawns. And I went out and got the business. But in high school and college, as you'd mentioned, they were really difficult for me, mostly academically. Didn't know that I had dyslexia, but I was labeled as dumb, stupid, slow, lazy, a daydreamer, a bunch of things. And yet I still knew that I saw the world slightly different than most, and was able to come up with new ideas and new ventures and whatnot. Where other people saw challenges, I just saw opportunities. Going into college, I worked full-time, put myself through school, and then the company I was working for asked if I would go and start up a division for them, a sales office in Arizona, in the Phoenix area. And I did that, took the opportunity, ran out there, started it up, got it running, found a general manager, and then decided, okay, what do I really want to do? That's when I started my first company.
Now, before we dive in, and we'll definitely dive into the first company, but what was so you go off to Arizona, what was the business you worked for, or where did you just start out at?
Yeah, it was a design firm, and it's the same company that I'd worked throughout college. And they opened up a sales office in Phoenix. And so I went out as the office manager, general manager, and ran everything from sales operations to delivery, client satisfaction, finding new opportunities for the company, and even doing some of the bookkeeping. I was the wrong person for that job, but they gave me the opportunity, and it was great. It was a good experience, kind of going out there without knowing anyone at a young age, and kind of finding your way through things.
No, that makes sense, and sounds like you get opportunity now. As you were just jumping into it, and I'd cut you off because I had a question, but you mentioned that you'd work for them. And how long did you work for that business out in Arizona?
A little over 6 years. So 5 years it took me to get through college, and then another year and a half ish to get that established, and found someone that was really well qualified to run it. And I had this inkling and this itch to start my own thing, to do something that that was kind of in the back of my mind. I thought, gosh, if now's the time to do something like that, before married, before kids, before any of those things, now's it. And I took it, and I started a sportswear company from scratch, design and manufacture it. And within 6 months, I had reps in 26 states, and the sportswear line was being represented in a number of brick and mortar kind of retail places. It was great fun. It was a lot of hard work, as you well know. And then about a year and a half, 2 years into that, I had reached kind of the maximum that I could take the company. And as you kind of alluded to the fact that there was a time when we were growing, but I didn't have the working capital to manage some of the orders that were coming in. So the only way I knew how to raise money was to save money at that time. So I left the apartment, stopped my lease there, cut everything, lived in my car for 2 months, and I lived on $2 a day. From the AM PM, you could get 2 hot dogs and a large Coke. And so I'd skip breakfast. I'd have lunch with that hot dog, and then I'd stick the other one. It was in Phoenix, so it was nice and hot. Stick it on the dash of the car, and it'd be warm to have for dinner. And find a parking lot, sleep, get up, do it again.
Well, it definitely sounds like you were, dedicated to the business. I don't know that I don't know that with any of my, maybe I would, but problem is I have a family and kids, so I don't know that I could, they would all fit in the car. That would quite work. But I think that there's,
Yeah.
definitely a level of, you have to decide, hey, how are you all in? How much are you going to willing to sacrifice, and what does that mean? And so you're getting the hot dogs and sleeping in the car, and trying to build a business, getting the working capital. Did it go well? Did after those couple months, did you start to get clientele, start to have it take off? Did you decide, I've had it, I'm going to go work for someone else again because I can only eat so many hot dogs? Or kind of, how did that go?
Right. Yeah, I am still a fan of hot dogs, but not quite that brand. The company did well. So we'd already gotten several orders, and we were working through those, but then some larger ones came in, and I needed the capital to get materials to, manufacture and service the clients and the orders that came in. So we got through that hump, and it started to grow. But again, it's going to be the same thing. I could see that it needed capital, and the guy that I'd hired to do marketing for me had capital, was really interested in it, and he and his wife had been in the industry before, and they were looking for another venture. So I was happy to sell it to them. And I found that, I was interested in corporate life for large corporations. And I found my way into a large multinational, a global company at the time, Electronic Data Systems. Not sure if you know of them, but EDS was run by Ross Perot, and they had, the time that I was with them, between 100 and 110,000 employees worldwide, and went in there and learned a ton about business. Also learned how to raise money. And served a bunch of different industries. And corporate America was great for the training and for the exposure, not so much for creative outlet and entrepreneurial spirits. I did found a small division within the business unit I was in that was for emerging markets, which felt more like the entrepreneurial SWAT team, 10 to 12 of us, figure this out. Let's go and find some clients, see if we've got a value proposition, and so on. So I kind of hopped around, did 5 relocations in 6 years with them. Left when I hit the glass ceiling, went to another large company, went to some international companies. And then
one question on that before you get too far. So, you work for them for a period of time, and, people say they hit the glass ceiling, and that can mean different things. I mean, it can mean that,
good point.
I'm not making enough money. I want to make more money, or I can't grow as much as I want to grow, or I want to take on a position, or I'm just tired and burned out and I really don't want to do this anymore. So kind of as you're hitting the glass ceiling, first of all, kind of how do you define that? But also, how did you know that you're reaching that point?
Yeah, so I'd say D, all of the above. And the glass ceiling for me wasn't necessarily burnout or energy. It was the opposite. I had no place to put my energy. I'd hit the ceiling, I've been promoted, as I mentioned. I relocated 5 times in 6 years, and I was to the point where I had very candid conversations with business unit presidents that my next step would be some form of vice president, or a senior vice president or something like that within a business unit. And they said candidly, you're going to need to wait 10 to 15 years because the people that are in those spots aren't going anywhere. And obviously, the higher up you go in an organization, the fewer opportunities there are. And I had no ill will toward the company. I knew I was in my prime and I needed to keep moving. And I wasn't willing to wait 10 years for that position to open up. And thankfully so, because, I left, cashed out my stock, those kinds of things. And within a few years, the company had really not done well. So I might have been in a position to take that VP. I don't think I would have wanted it then because it was on that decline. So for me, it was opportunity. I'd learned everything I thought I could learn in the positions that I had, was grateful for it. I had tons of energy and was newly married, no children. My wife was a trainer at the same company, so we both traveled. I wanted to go. Let's go. Let's find something. Let's go. Let's get bigger and grow. And that just wasn't there. So the opportunity to do the same thing at a smaller, similar company came up. Happy to take that, and did a few more of those. And that's when in 2007, I started my own advisory firm.
Now, and we'll definitely get
Yeah.
to the advisory firm now. Before we get to there, so you said you went to a few different companies that were kind of on the smaller size or the startup size, and kind of worked with them, but before getting to the consultancy you're doing now. But as you're doing those, what were the companies and kind of what made you go between them? In other words, kind of or jump between the different jobs, not in a bad way, but just it's always interesting. There are different people. Sometimes you're always thinking, rather than do my own startup or do my own side hustle or that, I'll just work for someone else, and you never can quite scratch that itch, and eventually find out, hey, I just have to do it myself. Sometimes, hey, I've been happy working for there, but they're startups and they didn't go anywhere. Kind of, what was the transition as you're going through those before you start doing your own side hustle?
Yeah, interesting. So they seem to begin to decrease in revenue and the number of employees. So I went from EDS to Unisys and helped them start their outsourcing business, which is what I was doing at EDS. And that division was about 15,000 people instead of 110,000. And we sold my team sold the largest in the history of that company in a single deal in 6 months. From contact to contract, we closed a $220 million deal, which is the largest in Unisys history. I think it's the second largest now ever. And that was back in the 90s, early 90s. And then, that kind of progressed, got as far as I could go there, and kept wanting to use the experiences that I had, as well as gather new experiences. I'm just really big on taking what you've learned and applying it everywhere. Not just, I learned it here, and so it has to be outsourcing, or it has to be whatever. One of my fondest memories is sitting with a business unit president at General Electric one afternoon. We were just talking a little bit, and before I knew it, it was 4 hours. We'd had lunch. He'd put off all of his other meetings, and we simply brainstormed a brand new solution on his whiteboard of his conference room. 30 days later, it launched. Put the company, I was a division president for a software company, and it put that company on the map, and it helped GE in a huge way. So it's applying those experiences in unique ways that has really kind of defined my life and my career. And a lot of it has to do with dyslexia, because we see things other people miss. It's scientifically proven that we have heightened awareness, visual, peripheral vision, literal, and then our minds think of things that are unrelated and try and apply them and put them together to create something new. And everything that we see and hear reminds us of something else. So our memories stack and they compound. So after 40 years of doing this in a little over 24 industries and almost 30 countries, I've got a few memories, and they just all play together real nice in my head, ready to be applied at any moment.
Well, that's awesome. So no, and that sounds like a great journey to kind of lead to where you're more at today. So now
Yeah.
you've kind of gone through those startups and you work through your way through those, and then towards the end of that, you're and still have a good journey ahead of you. But you say, okay, want to do kind of a consultancy now. And I think when we talked about it beforehand, but you can definitely correct me where I'm wrong. Is that this started out, and maybe it still is, but it was a side hustle. In other words, you were still
Mhm.
working a full-time job. Then we're going to go back to doing hot dogs and living in the car again, or maybe you didn't have to this time, but you
Right.
started to do the consultancy. So kind of how did you land on that's what you wanted to start out, and kind of how did it go?
Yeah. It- Up to that point, I had most of my focus had been in revenue generation, and that's all departments. The only place that I haven't had a chief officer position is the CFO, and I'll never be a CFO. But I've been CEO, of my own companies. I've been the president of divisions. I've been COO, chief revenue officer, chief sales officer, which includes marketing. And so I wanted to take some of those experiences and share those with, mid-sized companies, small to mid-sized companies, to bridge the gap between the siloed departments, showing their interoperability and interdependency, and then allow them to think out loud and show them how ideas from other industries could apply. An example, in 2010, I was working with a hospital in the Midwest, and we did a 2-day session. It was a Friday afternoon. It was first part of the year. It was really cold. I remember that. My hands and my feet were really cold because it was, freezing in the Midwest. That hospital was ranked kind of mid-pack. It was declining towards being kind of marginalized, and the patient engagement organization wanted to increase their focus on advertising, on patient surveys, and really become the hospital of choice for their community. Met with the director of that department as the Friday was wrapping up, and she said, "Hey, I need to reschedule next week's meeting because I'm taking my family to Hawaii." No problem. We rescheduled. I went home back to Dallas, and that Sunday I got a message from, we'll call her Jennifer Johnson, the director, and she said, "I get it. That whole periphery thing, I get it." I'm like, okay, I've never heard you so excited. What do you mean? What happened? Well, my husband and I and the kids, we just checked into the hotel, and I got this text message. And so she starts reading to me this text message on her mobile phone. And she said, it said something like, "Welcome to the Waikoloa Village Hotel and Resort. Glad that you chose us. If there's anything I can do to make your stay exceptional, please call me." And it was the general manager, and he gave her his personal phone. And she says, "Do you get it? Do you get it?" Said, "Well, I've been to that property. It's a great property. That's a good experience for guests." She said, "Exactly. Why can't we do the same thing for patients in my hospital?" I went, "Oh yeah, you do get it." There was a solution that was already existing, low risk, immediate application. She came back, we worked some things, and within 30 days, she was applying that. Now you can fast forward, more than a decade, and you see electronic communication between providers, hospitals, patients all over, but not in 2010. And now that Jennifer Johnson is the chief patient experience officer for a 20 hospital health system. She kicked it off. It was that just mind shift of saying, wow, this hospitality, they use text. Why can't I do that? I do the same thing when I meet with Mike, my buddy at the Home Depot. Every Saturday morning, I go and get stuff because I don't need it, but I want it. And Mike is working in the hardware aisle, and he's got a wealth of experience from his life. He just works there for fun. And we talk about everything. And there's just so much that you can learn by just looking around. So that's what I wanted to bring to corporate America. After being diagnosed with dyslexia at age 40, everything started to click. I went, oh, I get that. I get that. And now we've found these 8 skills that are in 8 of the top 9 highest skills needed for the year 2025 and beyond for every industry happen to align with the innate skills found in dyslexic innovators. And so we've cracked the code. We know what those skills are. And now instead of coming up with solutions, I'm teaching people how to do it themselves.
Now, No, I think that definitely makes sense and sounds like an exciting place to be. So now with that, so where does that put you today? Is it, hey, you've grown up a consultancy and it's a full-time gig and took off and making you rich beyond wild belief, or it's still a side gig and you're still working a full-time job and you're open to balance both, or you want to do the side hustle as a full-time thing? You're kind of, where does that leave you?
Well, I think you kind of catch on that I've got a little bit more energy than normal. And I don't drink coffee or any caffeine. So, oh, God help us if we had coffee here. A friend of mine's asked me, I'm the chief revenue officer for Intelligent Contacts, which is a software company that does payments and communications for healthcare and for the accounts receivable management industry. And so that's kind of my full-time day job. The consulting firm has kind of ebbed and flowed. My largest client in 2011 said, look, we're paying you a lot of money. Why don't you just come here and just, run this? So I went and did that. I said, as long as I can keep doing this on the side, they said, fine. And so over the last, however, decade plus, it's been on and off based on the amount of energy that I have. I've added to the advisory firm. I do public speaking and I've got I'm a co-author, a contributing author for a book that comes out in May. So I don't sleep much, but that's okay. I can sleep when I'm dead. And I expect that, the company I'm working for, it's outstanding company. We're growing leaps and bounds. I love that. And the advisory firm is doing the same thing. So I just find people that, especially on the advisory side, that can do the day-to-day operational things. And I contribute the content, the brain trust. And then I'm working with executives that are part of that mastermind as they come up with new content, and we're co-branding and making that available to more and more people. It's just a boatload of fun. A boatload of fun.
Oh, that's awesome, and that definitely sounds like a fun place to be in life. And so now with that, now as we kind of have caught up a bit to where you're at today, and even looking, and looking to where maybe but you're headed, always a fun time to jump to the two questions I always ask at the end of each journey. Now, before we do that, just as a reminder, as a note or heads up to the audience, we also are doing the bonus question where we talk about one crazy entrepreneurial idea is after the normal episode wraps up. So if you want to hear that, definitely stay tuned to make sure you catch that. But before we dive to that, and we do the normal two questions at the end of each episode, first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? What did you learn from it?
So while I was sleeping in my car in Phoenix in the summer, the worst decision that I made after we got through all of that, I went back and, I had a place to live now and all that. I sold the company, and I sold it too soon. And it was because I didn't know how to raise capital. More importantly, I didn't have the guts to ask for help, to be just completely transparent. What I learned is that when you develop something and when you become so independent and reliant, there comes a point when you have to ask for help. And it's at that defining moment that you either choose to ask for help, struggle, fail, whatever that is. And I chose not to ask for help. And I found that, my marketing director was willing to buy the company. It worked out for me. I moved on. Looking back at it, it was probably the worst decision I could have made, because there were so many more lessons I could have learned by just asking for help. And man, it doesn't hurt me. It doesn't pain me to think about that, but that lesson has stuck with me, and I'm getting better at it. I'm not perfect yet, but I'm getting better at it. And I'll ask you for some help after we finish our recording.
Absolutely. No, that's great. And I think it's always good to, as you say, get better at it. And it's, the mistakes you make, one, it's easy to make them, but two, it's, there's plenty of learning to do. And it's rarely just hey, I've made, I'm now perfect at that thing, but you can always work to improve it and make it better. And so I think that's a great takeaway. Yeah. Second question I always ask is, now if you're talking to someone that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Okay, so this is a compound sentence. So, all right, it's going to be more than one, but just go with me on it. It's going to take you at least twice as long as you think. it will probably be 3 times more frustrating and challenging than you could imagine. And it's a million times more rewarding if you stay the course, ask for help, and don't give up. Just keep going. I was listening to a friend of mine who's a keynote speaker yesterday, and she said she's a fighter pilot, one of very few fighter pilots in all of the military. She's in the Air Force, and she said that she went in saying, "I will fail out before I walk out. I'm capable. I'm going to do this." Obviously, asking for help and getting all the training, but they will have to fail me because I'm not quitting. And that's my advice, to recognize this is going to be a whole lot harder than you imagine. And there's no way for us that have gone through it to really tell you. You have to go through it, but don't give up. And when you think it's, you're about to give up, say, how long did I think it would take? Oh, take about 2 years, and you're 4 years. Great. You're just around the corner. Right. Yep. And you think, man, I think this is like 3 times harder than I ever thought it would be. Awesome. You're right at the precipice of a great breakthrough.
No, I think that there's a lot. And I think that, the interesting thing is, even when people say, oh, it's going to take as long as, or longer than you expect, and then you double it and you say, no, I'm being generous. It usually still takes longer than what you expect, even when you're saying it's going to, I think it'll take me a year, so I'm going to say 2 years. And then to your point, it really takes 4 years. And yet people think, oh, I'll be the exception. I can get this down to where I know exactly how long it's going to take. And it always takes longer. And I think that's just the nature of almost every project. But I think it's a good thing to anticipate. Hey, wherever you think it's going to land, even if you're giving yourself some cushion, give yourself some more cushion, because it always is going to take that extra time. So
absolutely. Everybody had a grandma that grabbed him by the cheek and said, "You're special. You're unique. You're one of a kind." And that's true in many cases, but you're not that unique that you can take a 5-year experience and compact it into a year or 2.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more.
You're special if you last the 5 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, now as we wrap up the episode, before we get to the bonus question, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Terrific. So you can find me on my website. I'll just say that it's going through a whole rebranding process. So if it looks funky, or the content doesn't look real great, then just stick with me. It's pauldanielsjr.com, pauldanielsjr.com. And there's a contact tab there. There's, if people are interested in having me come to speak at their next event, there's a hold the date tab as well. And I'm always open to new people from any walk of life that want to connect with me on LinkedIn. And that's, LinkedIn, just look up Paul Daniels Jr. and likely you'll find me. I'm in the Texas area. I'd be happy to connect with you and answer questions. And my personal mobile phone, no, I'm not going to give you my personal mobile phone.
All right. Well, then they'll just have to wait until they connect up there to get the personal mobile phone.
Yeah, right.
That's definitely some great ways to connect up with you, and definitely encourage people to do so.
Thanks.
Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners. Make sure to click share, subscribe, and leave us a review, because we want to make sure that everyone finds out about all of our awesome episodes and journeys. And last but not least, if you ever need help with your patents, your trademarks, or anything else with your startup, your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, now as we've wrapped up the normal part of the episode, and it's always kind of fun to switch gears just a bit and, still along the same lines, but I always find that there's always a lot of times, if you're an entrepreneur, you don't just have this one idea that you want to pursue. You'll have a lot of ideas that you want to pursue. Usually pick 1 or 2 of them. And then the other ones, you always kind of have that, well, if someday pile, or if I ever have time pile. And so it's always kind of fun to hear the kind of crazy entrepreneurial, if I can say it without getting tongue-tied, ideas that people come up with. So with that, I turn it over to you to share with the audience your one crazy entrepreneurial idea.
Well, part of this comes from my time in sportswear. And then the other part comes from what you do with IP and trademarks and a bunch of other things. For those listeners that remember the 80s and fads, they kind of came and went. There was, pet rocks and different kinds of clothing. And we certainly rode some of those waves when I was at my sportswear company. However, there are still fads, if you will, or things that trend. And for those that have an idea, my entrepreneurial idea is to take that idea that you have, make it a product or service, spend most of your energy on developing awareness and buzz around that solution, outsource all the production of it, all the things that are overhead, that are operationally focused, to people that are really good at that. Ride that wave as it continues, as it grows. And yes, it takes time to grow, but before it reaches its peak in its life cycle, license it. License the idea, license the service, product, whatever that is, and do it again. Rinse, repeat. And you can have multiple cycles going at the same time. But sticking to that, for those that like variety in their life and the way that they think, it's an opportunity to create new things, to always have them going. And no, you don't get the full benefit of being the founder of Amazon, but you can ride Amazon like things up to a certain point before it has to be operationalized and standardized, and you building these cultural things that may not fit the creative model, and license it, sell it, still hold a percentage of that, let that grow up and trail off like all life cycles while you're starting another one. And so at my title for that is FADCO.
So let me ask this one.
Yeah.
I got it. I like that. I like the name. So now with that, one question I had as as hearing the idea is, I think one of the difficulties sometimes can be is identifying what that next new fad would be. In other words, you had this Snuggie out there. When you see the Snuggie, after you see it and everybody buys it, you say, oh, that makes sense. Well, that's kind of a catchy idea. And some of those other ones, the fidget spinners and that, and yet, some of the difficulty is coming up with or anticipating which is the next fad. So any thoughts or ideas as to how you figure out or anticipate what the next fad is that you're then going to do the company?
Yeah. Okay. So you hit it right in the head, Devin. It's not anticipating, it's creating the fad. So if you think of, I don't want to use the family with the K last name in California, but you think of their ability to influence things. I could put an ugly pair of shoes on them, and if they like it, 1 million people like it. So it does involve having influencers. It involves being engaged in a market or something that is moving in a direction. And it also requires you to think ahead or outside of that box to come up with a new idea. Then you float that idea without a ton of investment to see what kind of traction you can get. Maybe you do some prototypes and things like that, and you gather enough interest that you now have the key phrases, the key way to market that, promote it, find the influencers, get it out in front of the marketplace with small investment. You're not building a manufacturing plant. The Snuggie didn't have a warehouse of 500,000 of those. It had some. And it had the ability to build those and to manufacture them quickly, right? And then it gets on QVC and boom, done.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
No, I like that, and I like the idea, and I think that I think the magic would be in as to how you actually get or create the fads, or get it out there. And I think that's a fun way to, or a fun business would be, is to go out, create those fads, and then get them out in the marketplace and then do that. So I love the crazy idea, and I don't think it's that crazy. Yeah. So we'll put it up there for all the audience. We do a weekly or video where you get to vote on the great ideas, terrible ideas. So definitely make sure to check that out and vote on the idea. And with that, thank you again, Paul, for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Cheers. Best to everybody.